The retirement home is quite comfortable, Arthur. You'll be fine. It's what Emily would have wanted. The words slithered from my son-in-law's mouth, a venomous whisper in the sterile silence of the lawyer's office. He stood there, a predator in a tailored suit, his face a mask of feigned sympathy that couldn't quite hide the triumphant glint in his eyes. My son, David, stood beside him, his gaze fixed on a scuff mark on the polished floor, the physical embodiment of shame. He couldn't look at me. He couldn't face the man whose life was being dismantled piece by piece before his very eyes. A week ago, I had buried my daughter, the light of my life. Today they were burying me. He thought he had won. He thought he had neatly packaged up the old man, the inconvenient relic of his wife's past, and shipped him off to fade into obscurity. He thought he had secured his prize, $55 million and the house I had built with my own hands. He was wrong. What Mark, in his infinite arrogance, failed to understand was that a grieving father has nothing left to lose, and a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man in the world. He had taken my daughter's legacy, but I was about to dismantle his entire existence. And if you're watching this, I want you to witness what happens when insatiable greed pushes a good man to his breaking point. So smash that like button and subscribe, because you will not believe how this story of justice unfolds. The lawyer, a man named Sterling with a face like worn leather, cleared his throat. It was a dry, perfunctory sound, devoid of any real emotion. He had seen this drama play out 100 times before. For him, it was just another Tuesday, another estate settled, another family torn apart by the magnetic pull of money. As per the last will and testament of Emily Sterling Vance, he droned, his voice a monotone hum, her entire estate, including all shares in Oratech Incorporated and the property at 114 Willow Creek Lane, passes to her surviving spouse, Mr. Mark Vance. He slid a sheaf of papers across the mahogany desk towards Mark. My son-in-law's hand shot out, snatching them as if he feared they might dematerialize. He didn't even try to hide his eagerness. His eyes, dark and greedy, scanned the documents, his lips curling into a faint, self-satisfied smile. The color drained from my face. My home. The home where Emily took her first steps, where I taught her to ride a bike, where we spent countless nights in the garage building the very company that was now his. It was all his. Of course, Mark has made a generous provision for you, Arthur, Sterling added, almost as an afterthought. He pushed a single check in my direction. It felt miles away. $10,000. Pittance. An insult. It was less than the cost of the imported marble countertops Mark had insisted on installing in my kitchen last year. To help you get settled, Mark said, his voice dripping with condescension. He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes was not pity, but dismissal. I was a loose end, a piece of old furniture to be disposed of. I've taken the liberty of arranging a place for you at the Golden Years residence. It has a wonderful community. You'll make friends, he said it so casually, as if he were recommending a restaurant. He was evicting me from my life, from my memories, and framing it as an act of kindness. The rage that boiled in my chest was so hot it was silent. It was a white-hot, focused fury that burned away the grief and left behind something hard and sharp. David finally flinched, a small, pathetic movement. "Dad," he started, his voice a weak murmur. Mark shot him a look, a quick, sharp glance that was both a warning and a command. David's mouth snapped shut. He had made his choice. He had chosen the gilded cage over his own father. I didn't say a word. I simply stood up, my old bones protesting, and took the check. I didn't look at them. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing the devastation in my eyes. I walked out of that office with the weight of their betrayal pressing down on my shoulders. But in my heart, a new, cold purpose was beginning to form. They thought I was a feeble old man, a relic of a bygone era who could be easily swept aside. They had woefully, catastrophically underestimated me. They had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten that I was the man who had helped build an empire from scrap wire and impossible dreams in a dusty garage. And I would use that same determination, that same resilience to build their ruin. My mind drifted back, as it so often did, to the garage. It was my sanctuary, our sanctuary. The smell of solder and ozone was the perfume of my daughter's childhood. Emily was a force of nature from the moment she was born, a whirlwind of questions and ideas. While other kids were playing with dolls, she was taking apart old radios, her small brow furrowed in concentration as she traced the pathways on the circuit boards. I was an electrical engineer by trade, with a small repair shop that barely kept us afloat after my wife passed. But my real passion was tinkering, creating. I saw that same fire in Emily. I nurtured it. I taught her everything I knew about resistors and capacitors, about logic gates and programming languages. Her mind was a sponge, and her imagination was a galaxy. The idea for Oratech was born on a greasy napkin over a shared plate of French fries at a local diner. She was 16. She envisioned a new kind of intuitive software, a system that could anticipate user needs, a digital assistant so seamless it felt like an extension of one's own mind. It was brilliant. It was impossible. And I told her we had to build it. We poured everything into it. I sold my repair shop, the only security I had in the world, and we invested every penny into server space and prototypes. Our lives became a blur of late nights fueled by cheap coffee and unshakable belief. The garage was our world. Wires snaked across the floor like metallic vines, whiteboards were covered in a chaotic scrawl of algorithms, and the hum of computer fans was our constant soundtrack. We were partners. I was the hardware guy, the pragmatist who could turn her ethereal concepts into tangible, working technology. She was the visionary, the software architect whose code was pure poetry. There were failures, hundreds of them. Moments of despair when it felt like we were chasing a ghost. But we always had each other. I remember one night, after a catastrophic server crash wiped out a month's worth of work, she sat on the cold concrete floor, tears streaming down her face. I sat down next to her, put my arm around her shaking shoulders and said, "We don't quit, Em. We just build it better," and we did. That resilience, that refusal to accept defeat, was the bedrock of Oratech. It was the bedrock of our relationship. The breakthrough came 3 years later. A tech blogger got wind of our beta version, wrote a glowing review, and suddenly, Silicon Valley was knocking on our garage door. The next few years were a whirlwind. We moved from the garage to a small office, then to a sprawling campus. Oratech became a titan. Emily was hailed as a genius, a prodigy. And I was the proudest father on the planet, happy to be the quiet old man in the background, the chief technical officer who still preferred a soldering iron to a spreadsheet. The money poured in more than I had ever dreamed of. But it never changed us. We bought the house on Willow Creek Lane, a beautiful place with a big yard, but we spent most of our time in the new, state-of-the-art workshop I built in the basement. The money was just a byproduct of our passion. It was never the goal. And then Mark Vance entered our lives. He was a financial analyst from a venture capital firm that had invested in Oratech. He was handsome, slick, and radiated a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He spoke in a language of acquisitions and market caps, a world away from our language of schematics and code. Emily was smitten. She saw him as sophisticated, worldly. I saw him as an opportunist. I saw the way his eyes lingered on the company valuation reports, the way he would steer every conversation towards profit margins and exit strategies. He didn't see Oratech. He saw a golden goose. I tried to warn her gently. He just seems more interested in the company's stock price than in the company itself, I'd say. She would laugh it off. "Oh, Dad, you're just protective. That's his job. He sees the world through numbers. I see it through code. We balance each other." She was so in love, so convinced of his goodness, that she couldn't see the calculating machine behind the charming smile. My son, David, was an easier target. David was a good kid, but he lacked Emily's drive. He floated through life, from one mediocre job to another, always living in the shadow of his brilliant sister. He loved her, but he was also deeply envious of her success. Mark saw that weakness and exploited it. He offered David a high-paying executive position at Oratech, vice president of synergistic outreach, or some other meaningless corporate title. It was a job with a corner office, a huge salary, and zero responsibilities. David was bought. He became Mark's staunchest defender. Whenever I raised a concern about Mark's influence, David would jump in. "Dad, you're being paranoid. Mark is great for Emily. He's helping her manage everything. You should be grateful he was grateful, all right? Grateful for the sports car and the fancy apartment that his loyalty to Mark had purchased." The first sign of the true darkness in Mark came during Emily's illness. It was cancer, aggressive, insidious, and swift. Our world, once so bright with promise, was plunged into the sterile, terrifying world of hospitals and chemotherapy. I practically lived by her bedside, reading to her, holding her hand, just being there. Mark was there too, but his presence felt different. It was performative. He would arrive with expensive flowers, kiss her forehead for the benefit of the nurses, and then spend most of his time in the hallway, pacing back and forth on his phone. One evening, I stepped out to get a cup of coffee and I overheard him. He was speaking in a hushed, urgent tone, his back to me. "No, the prenup is ironclad, but that doesn't matter now. As the spouse, everything defaults to me. We need to be ready to liquidate the R&D assets as soon as the probate clears. There's a competitor in Asia that will pay top dollar for the patent portfolio." My blood ran cold. My daughter was fighting for her life in the room next to him, and he was already carving up her life's work like a vulture. The color must have drained from my face, because when he turned and saw me, a flicker of panic crossed his features before being replaced by that familiar, smarmy smile. "Just business, Arthur," he said smoothly. "Making sure Emily's legacy is secure." His face was a mask of concern, but his eyes were cold, dead things. I knew then. I knew exactly what he was. Emily knew too, in her own way. In her last lucid days, she was frail, a ghost of her vibrant self. She grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Dad," she whispered, her voice raspy. "Promise me you'll protect it. Protect our work." I thought she was talking about the company. "Of course, sweetheart." Always she squeezed my hand tighter. "No, not just the company. The idea, the spirit of it. Don't let him turn it into just money." Then she said something that I didn't understand at the time. She gave me a small, encrypted thumb drive, one we used to store old family photos. "Everything you need is with our memories, Dad. Don't forget." I thought she was being sentimental. I thought she was telling me to hold on to our past. I had no idea she was giving me the key to the future, the key to my revenge. The Golden Years residence was as bleak as its name was cheerful. It smelled of disinfectant and despair. The walls were a pale, institutional beige, the color of resignation. My room was small, with a single window that overlooked a manicured lawn where other forgotten parents sat staring into space. This was my prison. This was where Mark expected me to wither away, a footnote in the story of his glorious wealth. For the first few weeks, I almost did. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing presence that made it hard to breathe. I would sit for hours, staring at the beige wall, the echoes of Mark's words and Emily's last breaths replaying in my mind. But then the rage returned. It was a slow burn at first, a tiny ember in the ashes of my sorrow. But it grew. It was the memory of his voice on the phone in that hospital corridor. It was the image of his greedy hands snatching Emily's will. It was the look of dismissal in his eyes. He hadn't just taken the money. He had desecrated my daughter's memory. He had turned her beautiful creation, born of love and passion, into a pile of cash for his own vulgar amusement. That cold, calculated fury became my fuel. I took the $10,000 check, that grand insult, and I cashed it. I didn't spend it on comfortable slippers or extra pudding. I went to a discount electronics store and bought the most powerful laptop I could afford. I paid for a year of the fastest internet the residence offered. The other residents looked at me with curiosity. The old man in room 2B, hunched over a glowing screen day and night. They probably thought I was playing solitaire or looking at pictures of my grandchildren. They had no idea I was forging the weapons for a war. My first task was to understand the key Emily had given me. The thumb drive. I plugged it into my new laptop. It looked exactly as she said. A collection of old family photos, encrypted for privacy. Pictures of her as a gap-toothed kid on her first bike. A picture of us in the garage, covered in grease, holding up our first working prototype. Our memories. I clicked through them, a fresh wave of grief washing over me. And then I saw it. Tiny anomaly. One of the file names, img_2004_summer_bbqjpg, was slightly different. It had an extra character at the end, a character that wasn't visible, a non-printing ASCII character. It was a breadcrumb, a signpost left by a master coder for her old-school engineer father. My heart started pounding. This was it. Using some of my old knowledge of steganography, the art of hiding data within other data, I began to probe the image file. It took me a week of relentless work, trying every decryption key I could think of. Her birthday, my birthday, the date we founded the company. Nothing. I was about to give up when her last words echoed in my head. Everything you need is with our memories, the memory. The photo was of her on her 5th birthday, about to blow out the candles on a cake shaped like a robot. The name of her favorite childhood toy robot was Cogsworth. I typed it in. COGSWORTH. The screen flickered. A command prompt opened. A simple black box with a blinking green cursor. It was a backdoor, a master key into the core architecture of Oratech. Emily, my brilliant, prescient daughter, had suspected Mark. She couldn't fight him while she was sick, but she had left me the sword. For the next 6 months, the Golden Years residence became my command center. I was a ghost in the machine. I spent 18 hours a day relearning, adapting. The world of corporate network security was a far cry from the simple coding I had done in my youth, but the logic was the same. Systems are systems. They all have rules and they all have vulnerabilities. And I had the master key. I didn't do anything at first. I just watched. I became a silent observer of Mark's reign. And what I saw was a symphony of incompetence and arrogance. Mark was a financial guy, a numbers man. He understood spreadsheets, not innovation. He saw Oratech's team of brilliant, passionate engineers not as assets, but as expenses. He slashed the research and development budget to the bone, redirecting the funds to a massive, gaudy rebranding campaign. He replaced the old, comfortable office furniture with minimalist Italian leather sofas that cost more than a junior engineer's annual salary. He fired Emily's most trusted and brilliant lead programmer, a woman named Maria who had been with us since the garage days, because she dared to question his decision to outsource core coding to a cheap, unreliable firm overseas. I documented everything. I made copies of every email, every internal memo, every outrageous expense report. I watched him use company funds to lease a fleet of luxury cars for his executive team. I watched him commission a life-sized oil painting of himself to hang in the lobby, a grotesque monument to his own ego. He was hollowing out the company, selling its soul for cheap glamour. His biggest folly, however, was his investing. Convinced of his own genius, he started using Oratech's massive cash reserves as his personal hedge fund. He poured hundreds of millions into volatile, high-risk, high-reward ventures. Cryptocurrency schemes, speculative biotech startups, dubious real estate developments in foreign countries. He was chasing a quick, spectacular profit that would prove to the world that he was more than just the man who married Emily Sterling. He was a visionary in his own right. The company's board, stacked with his own yes-men, rubber-stamped every reckless decision. David, my son, was among them. I saw the email chains where he would weekly question a decision, only to be immediately shut down by Mark with a condescending reply, often followed by a reminder of who signed his paychecks. And David would always fold. I watched as the company's foundations began to crack. The new software releases, handled by the cheap overseas firm, were riddled with bugs. Clients began to complain. The company's once stellar reputation started to tarnish. Mark's solution was to throw more money at marketing, to create a slicker illusion of success. He was a magician trying to distract the audience from the fact that his hat was empty. All the while, I watched and waited, my folder of evidence growing thicker each day. I felt like a patient spider, spinning a web of data, waiting for the perfect moment. I knew that just exposing his incompetence wouldn't be enough. He could spin that, blame the market, blame his subordinates. I needed something more definitive. Something that would lead to a total, undeniable, and catastrophic collapse. And then I found it. It was buried deep in Emily's old archives. A folder labeled Project Chimera. It was the genesis of Orateka's core technology. The foundational patent for their predictive algorithm. It was the secret sauce, the very thing that made their flagship product unique and defensible in the market. I saw that the patent was due for its 20-year renewal. It was a critical, non-negotiable deadline. If it lapsed, the technology would become public domain. Anyone could use it. The company's multi-billion-dollar valuation was entirely dependent on that single piece of intellectual property. I dug deeper. The automated renewal notifications from the patent office were being sent to an old legacy email address, one that Emily had set up years ago and that was no longer monitored. It was a simple administrative oversight, one that a competent CEO would have caught in a routine audit. But Mark was not a competent CEO. He was too busy posing for magazine covers and picking out new rims for his Lamborghini. This was the moment. This was the push the House of Cards needed. I could have intervened. I could have anonymously forwarded the email to the legal department. I could have saved the company. I could have saved my daughter's legacy from his incompetence. The thought lingered for a moment, a flicker of my old self, the builder, the protector. But then I saw his face in my mind. His smug, condescending smile in the lawyer's office. I heard his voice in the hospital hallway, carving up my dying daughter's life's work. The choice was clear. I didn't have to do anything destructive. I didn't have to hack or sabotage. All I had to do was nothing. I created a simple filter on the old email account. Any message from the Patent and Trademark Office was to be immediately and permanently deleted. Then, I sat back, and I waited for the deadline to pass. It was the most difficult and most satisfying 3 weeks of my life. The day the patent expired, nothing happened. The world didn't end. The stock market didn't crash. It was a silent, invisible event. But I knew that the heart of Orateka had just stopped beating. It was now just a matter of time before the body realized it was dead. The news broke 2 months later. A rival tech company, one that had been nipping at Orateka's heels for years, announced a new product. A product that was shockingly, impossibly similar to Orateka's flagship software. The tech blogs were on fire. The accusations of industrial espionage flew. Mark, in his arrogance, held a bombastic press conference. He called them thieves, charlatans. He promised to sue them into oblivion. His lawyers filed a massive patent infringement lawsuit. And then the rival company's lawyers filed their response. It was a single-page document, a printout from the Public Patent Office database, showing that patent number 7 for 32987B, Predictive Algorithmic User Interface, had expired and entered the public domain 2 months prior. There was no infringement. They had done nothing illegal. They had simply picked up the crown that Mark had carelessly dropped in the mud. The collapse was immediate and brutal. It was a corporate bloodbath. Orateka's stock didn't just drop. It evaporated. It fell 98% in a single day of trading. The company whose name was once synonymous with innovation was now a punchline, a cautionary tale of hubris and neglect. The banks, which had so eagerly loaned Mark hundreds of millions of dollars against the company's inflated valuation, called in their loans. All of them, all at once. Of course, Mark couldn't pay. He was leveraged to the hilt. The empire he had built on my daughter's genius crumbled into dust. He lost everything. The company was forced into bankruptcy. The campus was sold off. The art, the cars, the house on Willow Creek Lane, my house, were all seized by creditors. One day he was a titan of industry on the cover of Forbes. The next, he was a ruined man with nothing but a mountain of debt and a closet full of expensive suits he could no longer afford to dry clean. It was a cold Tuesday in November when he found me. I was sitting in the common room of the Golden Years residence, reading a book on quantum physics. A year had passed since he had cast me out. A year I had spent sharpening my mind and plotting his demise. I looked up when the orderly called my name, and there he was, Mark Vance. He was a ghost. The tailored suit was wrinkled and stained. His face, once tanned and confident, was pale and gaunt. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His confidence, his swagger was gone. It had been replaced by a raw, twitching desperation. He was accompanied by David. My son looked older, beaten down by the weight of his complicity. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Mark approached my table, his movements hesitant. He looked around the drab common room with a look of disgust, as if he couldn't believe this was where his story had led him. "Arthur," he began, his voice a hoarse croak. I need to talk to you." I calmly placed my bookmark in my book and closed it. I gestured to the empty chair opposite me. "Mark, to what do I owe the pleasure?" The sarcasm in my voice was light, almost undetectable, but it made him flinch. He sat down, his body slumping into the cheap vinyl chair. "It's all gone," he whispered, staring at the chipped Formica tabletop. "Everything. The company, the house. It's all gone." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. This was the part he had rehearsed. The appeal to our shared history, our shared loss. It was our company, Arthur. Emily's legacy. It was all I had left of her, the audacity of it. The sheer gall of him trying to invoke my daughter's name as a shield for his own catastrophic failure was breathtaking. He launched into a long, rambling story of betrayal and bad luck. He blamed the rival company, claiming they must have had inside information. He blamed the market for its volatility. He blamed his lawyers for not catching the patent issue. He blamed everyone and everything but the face he saw in the mirror each morning. "I was a good steward of her legacy," he insisted, his voice cracking with self-pity. "I was growing it, making it stronger. This was a freak event, a one-in-a-million screw-up by some low-level clerk." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "But we can fix this. You and me. Emily's father. They'll listen to you. If you go to the board, to the bankruptcy court, and testify. Tell them about your history with the company. Tell them we can rebuild. Your reputation. Your story. It has weight. People will rally behind the founder's father." He actually believed it. He thought I was his last, desperate gambit. The sentimental old man who could be trotted out to win the sympathy of a judge. He thought I was still the same feeble, grieving man he had discarded a year ago. I let him finish. I let him spin his web of lies and delusions until he had exhausted himself. The silence in the room was thick. David was shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. I simply looked at Mark, my expression unreadable. Then, I reached down into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I placed it on the table between us and opened it. I didn't need to log in. It was already open to the program I had been waiting a year to show him. On the screen was the stark black and green of the command prompt. The backdoor. His eyes widened slightly in confusion. He didn't understand what he was looking at. "What is this?" he asked, his voice laced with impatience. "Some kind of computer game?" "In a manner of speaking," I said, my voice quiet and calm. "It's a game of cause and effect. A game you lost before you even knew you were playing." My fingers moved across the keyboard. I brought up the archived emails from the patent office. The first notification, sent 13 months ago. The second, 6 months later. The final warning, a month before the deadline. I showed him the filter I had created. From Ustagov-action. Delete permanently. The color drained from his face. His jaw went slack. He was looking at the digital guillotine that had severed his corporate head. "You," he stammered. "You did this." "No, Mark." I corrected him gently. "I did nothing. That was the beauty of it. You were the captain of the ship. You were the one who steered it directly into the iceberg. I simply chose not to point out that it was there." I kept typing. I brought up the financial records, the extravagant spending, the reckless investments, the memos where he had ignored the warnings of his own financial analysts. I brought up the email where he fired Maria, Emily's brilliant programmer. Then I brought up Maria's new company address. She was now the head of R&D at the very same rival company that had taken him down. She tried to warn you about the patent system's archaic notification protocol, I said. She suggested a full audit of all intellectual property. You called her alarmist and fired her. She took her knowledge elsewhere. They were very happy to have her. His whole body was trembling now. The mask of the confident CEO was completely gone, shattered into a million pieces. All that was left was a pathetic, terrified man. Why? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Why would you do this? It was Emily's company. You destroyed her legacy. The rage I had kept locked away for a year finally broke through my calm facade. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, intense growl. Her legacy? You dare speak to me of her legacy? Her legacy was innovation, passion, and creation. You turned it into a monument to your own greed. You stood in a hospital hallway and planned how you would sell off her dreams while she was dying in the next room. You took her home, our home, and you threw me out like a piece of garbage. You didn't care about her legacy. You cared about her price tag. You saw a $55 million opportunity, and my daughter was just the cost of admission. I pointed a trembling finger at him. You didn't lose a company, Mark. You lost a privilege. The privilege of being associated with her genius. I didn't destroy her legacy. I purified it. I burned away the disease that was killing it. And that disease was you. He recoiled as if I had physically struck him. He looked at David, a desperate, silent plea for help. But David could no longer offer him any sanctuary. My son finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a year's worth of guilt and shame. Tears were streaming down his face. He's right, David choked out, his voice thick with emotion. Mark, he's right. I watched you do it. I stood by and I let you do it. I was weak and I was greedy and I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. The confession hung in the air. A final, damning verdict. Mark looked between the two of us, his mind finally grasping the totality of his ruin. There was no escape, no angle to play. He had been so thoroughly, so methodically outmaneuvered. His face contorted into a mask of pure, impotent rage. You old man, he snarled, his voice a venomous hiss. You'll pay for this. I'll sue you. I'll tell everyone what you did. I almost laughed. Sue me for what? For not reminding you to do your job? Tell who? You have no credibility, Mark. You have no money. You have nothing. You are nothing. That was the final blow. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Then, with a strangled cry of fury and despair, he shoved the table, sending my laptop clattering to the floor, and stormed out of the Golden Years residence, a broken man running from the wreckage of his own making. In the aftermath, the dust began to settle. Mark, as I predicted, had nothing. He was facing a slew of lawsuits from shareholders and creditors for gross negligence. His name was toxic in the financial world. The last I heard, he was working some menial sales job, living in a cheap apartment on the wrong side of town, a specter haunted by the ghost of a fortune he had so arrogantly squandered. David began the long, slow process of earning back my trust. He got a simple job as a mechanic, working with his hands, something real. He visited me every week, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to reconnect. Our relationship is not what it once was. The scars of his betrayal run deep, but it is healing. He has to live with his choices, and that is a heavier sentence than any I could have imposed. As for me, I did not remain at the Golden Years residence. Before the final collapse of Oratech, I had quietly reached out to a few of Emily's most loyal and brilliant engineers, the ones Mark had cast aside. Using the evidence I had compiled, I helped them stage a buyout of Oratech's remaining assets, the brand name, the client lists, the skeletal remains of the company, for pennies on the dollar from the bankruptcy auction. They formed a new, smaller, leaner company. They called it Phoenix. They asked me to join them, not as an executive but as a senior consultant, a guiding hand. A return to the garage in spirit. I moved into a small, comfortable apartment a few blocks from their new office. I don't have a mansion or a sports car. I have something far more valuable: purpose. I am once again surrounded by innovation and passion. I am helping to build something new from the ashes of the old. Emily's true legacy, the spirit of creation, is alive and well. It was never about the money. The $55 million was a weight that nearly drowned us all. Mark saw it as a prize to be won. I see it now as a curse that has finally been lifted. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. I think it is a dish that is not served at all. It is, instead, a meticulous process of allowing someone's own poison to consume them. I simply held up a mirror and let Mark see the monster he had become. The justice that followed was of his own making. If you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever been wronged by someone blinded by their own greed, let me know your story in the comments below. Your voice deserves to be heard. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of justice finally and satisfyingly being served.